Okay, welcome to the 2023 RC Updates and Special Topics. Okay, we don't have any disclosures. All right, our objectives today are to list 3 tools, resources, or programs that will help you in your daily work, to identify 1 issue network sites are experiencing and how it could be addressed and how you might learn from it, and then to examine your site's study conduct in the light of lessons learned from our case presentations. All right, we have a great agenda today. I'm gonna provide some updates on the many programs that we offer for RCs and RegCs. Trenton Gordon from the TDN Coordinating Center will provide an update on the TDN Video Library project. We'll have some case presentations, and then Patty will conclude with our story. Okay, so the RC mentoring program, hopefully you've heard of it before, but applications will open in January or February of 2024. This is really to match RCs, RegCs with other experience, RCs, RegCs to really provide mentoring and support throughout an 8-month program. So look for those. Then we have the Equip CR coaching program. Applications will also open in January 2024. And again, we would pair PI and RC teams with other PI and RC coaching teams to really work on quality improvement projects at their site. We have the Loan Assistance RC Award, or the LARC Award. Applications for this award will open in spring 2024. This award offers $10,000 in student loan repayment assistance over a 3-year period. The Caregiver Support Award for research coordinators and regulatory coordinators. Applications will also open in spring of 2024. This award provides a maximum of $2,500 annually to assist with any caregiving expenses. The ACRP certification exam funding. This is probably one of the best things that we offer. It provides funding for staff to sit for a professional certification exam free of charge. So congratulations to all that have taken part of this program. The next exams will occur in spring and fall of 2024. We have had 198 coordinators take part of this program. So I just want to take a moment and clap for everyone who has taken advantage of this amazing opportunity. All right, we will be resuming TDN site calls in the new year. This is an opportunity for every site to sit down virtually with TDN CFF leadership to just check in. How are things going? How can we help? How can we support you? So again, those signups will be via CFCRNet, and there will be an announcement in the TDN Digest, which leads me to the TDN Digest. All right, so this is an incredibly important email that shows up in your inbox every other week. It comes from a CFF email. And this is our way of communicating with our research and regulatory coordinators as well as our TDC directors. So all program announcements, including when the TDN meeting is and when the spring meeting is, and all of those awards that I just went through are going to be in the digest. So please make sure that you are receiving that. And if you aren't, please contact Patty Burks. All right, so I hope that really just showcased the many ways that the foundation supports you all, and I hope that you take advantage of those many programs. Okay, so now I'm gonna, Trenton. I'm gonna turn it over to Trenton Gordon, who's gonna walk us through the TDN Video Training Library, and I just wanna acknowledge all of Trenton's really hard work on this project, and I just think it's gonna be a great resource for everyone, so thanks.
All right, hello. Today I'm just going to give a couple brief updates on where we are with the video library on CFCRNet. Start us off just an overview of the training library as it's been today. The purpose was the video training library was to compile all the videos we have for CFF through the years into one location for easy access and have it all broken down into categories which helped with finding specific topics quickly. The next goal was to we sought out to accomplish was creating more videos on subjects we just didn't have covered yet. The issues we kept running into was that it really wasn't visually appealing, and the tools we had available for the SharePoint system just didn't allow us to do much. And despite our best efforts, it just looks like another library of documents. So that brings us to today. Over the course of the last year, we've worked with the CFF IT team to redesign the train page from the ground up. And the purpose was to create a more visually appealing web page, provide a better user experience for individuals trying to navigate specific topics. This was accomplished through the use of a dynamic search field, categories which allow specific keywords, and categories that allow you to filter that exact section you were looking for, and a clean look with thumbnails that relate to specific topics and contain descriptions. So, going to just jump over here. It's officially live today. And give a quick demo of how it looks. So it's in the exact same location as before, which is the resources page here. And if we can get right over here on the toolbox pages. Additionally, most pages you're on, you'll find it on the quick nav on the left-hand side here. But just go back. Right off the bat, you'll notice it's different. You got your search field here right below the intro, and then all the categories for the different videos up at the top. You can just do the scroll, finding something if you're not sure what you're looking for. But the cool thing I was really excited about was you can click these and it jumps right to it, that category. And then you can find a video off that subject. Additionally, you can use the search engine and search for specific words, and you'll get instant results for that. And if you just need to back up, you just clear that out and go back. Also, this is going to be a work in progress, but everything up until recently was housed on the CFF YouTube page. So it jumped to a link to YouTube, but what I am currently working on is, not sure what happened, moving everything over to SharePoint Microsoft Stream. So it's all in one system and will allow for an easier load usually. Anyways, down here in the bottom, if there's any related documents, we'll have that link there for easy access as well. And that's that. So then, just going back, make sure I'm all here. Next steps, we plan to create more videos that we have identified a need for. And to do this, we're hoping to collaborate with RCs who are interested in developing and creating these videos. We are going to keep up on the content and update as needed, but also remove things like older meeting materials and conferences and stuff like that. And finally, we just want to hear from you. So we'd love to hear your feedback and take any suggestions on topics you feel would be useful for trains. You can reach us by emailing us at cfcnethelp@sealedchildrens.org, and thank you. And now I'll introduce Adrian Dorico and Candy Schmall to talk about the case presentation.
I'm just going to slip over the slide deck. So you just this, and then AD open.
here. Good morning, everyone. Is this on? Yep. I have the pleasure of introducing Sarah Chetta, who's going to do our first case presentation. She is the Pediatric CF Research Coordinator at Tulane University in New Orleans, Louisiana. She's been their coordinator for about a year. She grew up in Virginia outside of Washington, D.C., but moved to New Orleans in 2014 to complete her BSN at LSU Health Science Center. She's been a nurse for about 10 years with experience in operating room nursing, as well as quality, patient safety, and performance improvement. Sarah?
Good morning. I guess I don't have to introduce myself. Thank you so much. In case you can't tell, I'm a little nervous, so I'm glad I'm kind of short and can't really see anybody. So this morning, first, I also want to say thank you to my PI and my team who's here today. So thank you so much, you guys, for all of your support. But today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we're calling the dance of informed consent and who is leading. Is that the right button? Maybe? Button? There we go. Okay, I have nothing to disclose related to this presentation. I'll figure it out. Sorry, guys. Okay. So every story or every dance begins with a foundation. And so our foundation begins in 2022 when, due to some unforeseen circumstances, our research coordinator unexpectedly left. It wasn't me. Which of course left us in a bit of a bind. And so this sort of gave us an opportunity to really recognize that there wasn't anything being done on our patient registry. And so we realized that we needed to do a full review of our consents for our patients in our registry. And so, maybe? Okay, sorry. And so after a full audit by our PI, we discovered that some of our patients were living in some very unique social situations. Before I present what we're calling our ensemble, all of the names of the patients have been changed. I'm going to present several patients. But also, I just want to say that these patients and situations are very closely linked to social work. And so they're very difficult to talk about, and so they're very challenging. But I just want to give you guys some high-level information related to the complexity of their social situation so that everyone can understand how our team got to our concerns about how we were consenting these patients. So our ensemble begins with John. Wrong button, sorry. So John's mom still maintains parental rights. The Department of Child and Family Services is involved in overseeing his care, but his great-grandmother currently has temporary guardianship. We also have Devin. Devin's mom is in jail. DCFS is also involved in overseeing his care, but he is in kinship care with his grandmother, who is currently working to adopt him. We also have Fred. Fred has been in foster care for a little over a year, and so long-term hope for Fred is that there's reunification with mom. And so Elliot is our final ensemble member. His mom still maintains parental rights. DCFS is also involved in overseeing his care. However, grandmother is the one that's providing all of his medical care, but she's not his legal guardian. But perhaps our most complicated dance is the story of Sheila. And so Sheila's story is very challenging and is very complicated, and there are many steps to her solo performance. And so the next few slides are really meant to be kind of a visual aid for everyone so that you can understand just how complex her story is. So Sheila's a 12-year-old cystic fibrosis patient. She's pancreatic insufficient, and she has 2 copies of Delta 508. So we have paternal grandparents. We have maternal grandparents. The red circle is grandma. We have dad, represented by the blue square. We have mom, who's represented by the ombre red circle. Dad and mom got married. Dad and mom had Sheila. Dad and mom eventually got divorced. And so Sheila ends up kind of bouncing back and forth between the care of mom and grandma. Eventually, DCFS is called, and so Sheila is removed from the care of both mom and grandma and is placed in the care of dad and stepmom. Dad ends up getting remarried. Dad and stepmom eventually break up. And dad decides that he can no longer care for Sheila, and so he drops Sheila off with his sisters. His sisters then decide that they can no longer care for Sheila, and so Sheila is again placed back in the care of mom and grandma. Grandma eventually ends up with care of Sheila. and then she also decides that she can no longer care for Sheila, and so she drops Sheila off at the hospital. Sheila's admitted for an exacerbation. Our team is involved, and of course we have some major concerns, and so DCFS is again called, and it's decided that Sheila can't go home with mom or with dad, and so Sheila is placed in foster care. So, as you can see, there's so many different social situations and so many different permutations, so we kind of needed to figure out what our next step was going to be in the consenting process. And so we did our literature review, we spoke to our local IRB, we talked to the Port CF team, and we reviewed what the Office of Human Research Protections had to say. And so the goal of this presentation is really just to kind of share our experience with you, and just provide the information that we found related to our state. I hope that it's helpful in some way if you guys find yourself in this situation, which I hope you never do, but it's can be different from state to state, so make sure you check with your local IRB, and check with your sponsors just to make sure before you make any decisions relating to consenting patients. So our basic choreography kind of begins with informed consent. So informed consent is understanding and voluntarily agreeing to participate in research. Informed consent in children is generally signed by a parent or guardian. So unfortunately, these kids in foster care and kinship care don't necessarily have a parent who's looking out for their well-being and trying to protect them, and taking care of their welfare and interests, or to even sign a consent. And so what we found was that there's a variety of adults who can potentially provide consent for these patients. So these can include the biological parents, which may not have physical custody, but maintain legal custody. You can also have a caseworker who really seems to take on majority of the legal responsibility for these children. You can have a guardian ad litem, which is an attorney or a special advocate that's assigned by the court system to know these children, and really act in their best interest and make recommendations to the court. There's also a court-appointed special advocate. They are similar to a GAL, but really they're a specially trained volunteer that's assigned by the court. And then, of course, a judge, which we all are pretty familiar with what judges can do. So now that we have some basic choreography, we can kind of move on to some advanced choreography. And so we, as part of our literature review, we looked at what the American Academy of Pediatrics, what their foster care policy had to say. Unfortunately, there wasn't anything specifically related to consenting patients for research, but what they did recommend was that caseworkers should really be the ones that are partnering with your medical team and your care team to really determine who is going to be the one to make these consents for the patients. We also learned that there is sort of a common consent out there, or a consent that can be signed for medical care and immunizations. And at the time of removal from the parent, this document can be signed to just consent for medical care and immunizations. It's not specific to research, though. So now that we have some kind of basic and advanced choreography, we can move to putting together some complex dance sequences. So we went to the Office of Human Research Office of Human Research Protection, say that 3 times fast, sorry, or OHRP, and we looked specifically at 45 CFR 46409, which deals with wards. So a ward is a child who's placed in the legal custody of the state or other agency, institution, or entity consistent with applicable federal or state or local law. It's a lot of words, I know, sorry. But basically, what they recommend is that IRBs may consider additional safeguards or advocates if children are going to become wards and be involved in minimal risk research, which is 46404, which is what the registry is minimal risk, or if you think that a child may become a ward while participating in research. So really the recommendations are just to kind of have an extra safeguard and advocate. So armed with kind of all of this information, Siri might be talking to me, sorry. We did reach out to the Port CF and the registry team to kind of see what their thoughts were on all of this. We were hoping when we reached out to them that there'd be reunification with the parents at the time. And so basically what they said is, if hoping for reunification shouldn't impact our decision, if we don't have proper consent or assent for these patients, that we need to immediately remove their data and delete them from the registry, and that unfortunately we can't include them in any of our reports, our rosters, or our grants until we're able to obtain valid consent. So coming back to Sheila, so Sheila was in foster care for a little over a year, or about a year. Mom ended up going to jail and lost her parental rights. Dad and stepmom thankfully were able to reconcile, and so Dad was awarded full custody of Sheila, and Sheila was placed back in the care of Dad and stepmom. The challenge that we faced was that stepmom was the one providing all of Sheila's care, giving her treatments, bringing her to all the appointments, but of course she has no legal rights to make medical decisions for Sheila. And so we kind of needed to, we were still sort of in the same situation. Eventually stepmom was granted a provisional custody by mandate or kinship navigator, which did allow her to make medical decisions for Sheila. And so we were able to get Sheila's stepmom to sign the consent. However, on the same day she signed the consent, she told us that they were moving to North Carolina and transferring centers, which is great for them, but we're very happy for the family. So kind of what does all of it mean? Our final flourish for all of this is clearly we had difficulty identifying who has the authority for consenting in these unique social situations. There's really no clear guidelines for consenting kids in foster care, kinship care. These are complex social situations which lead to complex recommendations for consenting. There's no straightforward or simple solutions. And so ultimately, unfortunately, we were not able to include these patients in our registry. But I do want to say that I think even though ultimately they aren't included in our registry, I think as part of our care process and our care team, we really focus more on these patients to make sure that we're providing them the appropriate care, that they're coming in for their appointments, that there's somebody looking out for them. It may not be their parents, but just ensuring that they are receiving the care. And then it's given us an opportunity to really look at all of our patients and make sure that the care that we're providing to all of them is the best care possible. So I think if anything, it's made our care better. Thank you very much.
If you have a question, we do have a microphone. I see one up here. If you have a question or a situation you'd like to share to add to this, we'd love to hear about it. Sarah, I did wonder, when you started looking at all this, did you just reach out to your local IRB, or was there a specific place you went looking for your state laws to guide you?
That was kind of our first. We did initially call our local IRB to talk to them about what we could do for Sheila, because we looked at all of this and didn't really think about the consenting process until we needed to consent Sheila, and stepmom was back involved. And so we called our local IRB and realized that we were going to try to e-consent and that kind of thing, and realized we weren't really set up for that, and then realized that maybe we need to, we kind of need to relook at all of this. So we did talk to we talked to our IRB educator, and so she gave me some resources, and then we just kind of did a Google search, and I partnered with our social work team to kind of look at, what are our options in the state related to who has custody, and we just kind of went from there. So it was kind of a Google search, just kind of terrible.
Question?
So what you learned from Sheila, have you been able to use that? Like, did you make a protocol or an SOP to kind of go forward now with these other cases? You said those other 4 that you also have. So what are you doing now?
So we do have a really great system in place in our, that's a great question. And we do have a really great system in place in our team. We meet weekly and review all of our kids that we think are in social situations or that potentially could be in social situations. We have a spreadsheet that we sort of keep track of all of these kids, and we check to see, did they make their appointment? Did they miss their appointment? We have an algorithm that we follow for when they miss the appointment. If they miss 3 appointments, then we're sending them a certified letter to say, hey, we're really concerned about you not having been here, what's going on, and we partner, we really try to make sure that we're keeping track of where they are and they aren't getting lost. And it's a team effort. I mean, we're all looking to make sure that we're keeping track of these kids. Did that answer your question? Okay.
Very nice presentation.
Thank you.
I just wanted to let everyone know that we came across a situation in our institution when a subject is 18 years old, and they consent on their own at that time, and they get transitioned. I decided to do an audit of our consent forms, and someone threw away the pediatric consent because they're now an adult. So after throwing several PVCs and taking some nitroglycerin, we ended up making an addendum to the consent and approaching every single 18-year-old who transitioned to the adult side to reconsent that we're able to still use their pediatric data. So it was a big disaster, but now that we're on board, and I hate to admit that, we do all make mistakes, and we learn from them. So that's why I wanted to share, be careful as we transition our adults, or even when they turn 18 and you don't see them for 6 months, what do you do at that time? It can get a little bit hairy.
Yeah.
Nice presentation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Another question?
I don't have a question. I just want to let everyone know. So I'm Adrienne Savant. I'm the PI on this, and I was new to the institution. If you haven't done an audit, do an audit. We have completely revamped our entire thing. We probably had 60% of our consents were wrong, not done as 7 to 11-year-olds. We had issues with our research coordinators prior to that. I'll admit I put too much trust in someone. And so we had to revamp our entire process for consents, and that's where this came up. And we thought that the foster care grandma who brings them in all the time but isn't actually the legal guardian, that was something that I hadn't encountered where I used to work. So not only do we have operating procedures for following up on these kids, we do for all of our consents. I think 3 or 4 of us touch it every time to verify and double check, because we all make mistakes. And so we just double check. Did you write the right date? Did you sign it in pencil? It's happened, things like that. So yeah, if you don't have it, I would highly suggest doing an audit. We have 150 patients. It did not take me that long, to go through them all and find all the errors. And we have now corrected, I would say, all of them, although there are some lost to follow-up families.
Morning. In your review of the literature when dealing with maybe wards or guardianships, our previous experience have been particularly they tend to always refuse or not allow for even voluntary research. Have you come across how you deal with those situations? It might be dependent on states, and I understand you mentioned in the Court of Federal Regulations, minimal risks, of course, but what are your situations like that?
We just decided to take them out because of the back and forth between, are they in mom's custody? Are they in dad's custody? Are they in kinship care? So I think it does depend on your state, and it is a very gray area, but we just opted to take them out because trying to keep track of this caseworker's been assigned, and then 3 months later it's a different caseworker, and just trying to keep track of all of that, of who is able to actually consent for the patients, it became a little too complicated. And so until they can have a more permanent situation, like our kid Fred, who's in foster care, we could approach the parents. I think actually we can't because they're foster care, and I don't think that they actually have any legal rights to make any medical decisions or sign the consent. So even in a foster care situation in our state, we can't even approach the foster care parents to sign that consent. So we just opted to take them out until we can have a more permanent guardianship situation where we can be sure that who's signing the consent is the appropriate guardian.
I could find nothing in the literature
Yeah.
about consenting someone in foster care or whatever, social situation, unless they were doing research on people who were in foster care. You couldn't find it. This kind of research could not find anything. So if anybody knows of anything, please share with everybody, but I could not find it.
Yeah, there's a lot of research on kids that are in foster care, but not consenting kids in foster care to participate in research. But they've done there's a lot of research about children that are in foster care.
For those of you in the back, if you couldn't hear that, she said that there was nothing she could find in the literature about consenting for research for these patients.
So our institution, most institutions probably have a legal department. So I know our process at our institution, if we encounter something like this, is we partner with our legal department, and so we'll communicate with them via email And, if we have any legal documents, they're able to review that to tell us whether or not we can consent. So I didn't know if that was an option for you guys or something you could consider to kind of partner with them and kind of figure those things out on the back end as well, because they are a great resource. So.
That is a great question and a great recommendation. We did try to partner with our legal department, and I hate to say this, we did not get very far. So it became more of an IRB. The legal department kind of gave us the same sort of recommendation, like if they're not legally in the custody of mom or dad, then you can't really do anything. So we kind of didn't really, unfortunately, give us a whole lot to move forward with, which is, again, part of why we decided to just kind of not include them, unfortunately.
I just have a quick question. When you're saying that you're taking them out of the registry, are you totally withdrawing them, or are you just inactivating their data from that point?
I deleted them from
So it's just deleted, so all of their old info is still there?
It's also there. When you delete them out of the registry, and I'm sure there's somebody from the registry team that can correct me if I'm incorrect, but what they told me was you can delete them and they sort of live in this ghost land until you are able to reconsent them and put them back in. Okay. It's just like when somebody transfers centers, you take them out and they go and sort of live in a little ghost area, and then once you enter them and add them, it'll come back in.
Gotcha. We had somebody recently withdraw consent, and that was like our first time ever, and so we had to have them fill out the paperwork and then get it sent in, and the registry team was supposed to mail them something, but our institution wouldn't let us mail it to the patient. They had to mail it to us to mail to the patient because that's not PHI they wanted to give to the foundation. So we had them mail us the letter, and then we turned around and mailed it to the patient. So I was just kind of curious on that circumstance, if they were in foster care or something where you would even mail a letter to. So
they didn't tell us anything. We didn't end up needing to send anything to the patient. It was just a little scary to hit delete and watch all of their data go. I was like,
We'll take one more question and then we'll move to our second case presentation.
This is more of a comment, but I live in Florida, and I know every state is different because we're Johns Hopkins in Florida, which is different than Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, so I'm very familiar with the differences between states. But in Florida, we've had situations where the mother had consented. It wasn't actually for CF, but for another case that we had. In Florida, if you have a guardian is not allowed to consent for research unless you go back to the judge and the judge makes the statement that they can consent for the research. If the guardianship papers state that they can consent for research, then that is allowed. And we had a really bad situation with a child that was getting IgE treatments, and the mother was killed in a car accident, and the grandmother was made guardian, but she had to go back to court, get that statement put in the guardianship papers so that the child can continue their treatment. So that's something to look at too, whether the judge can actually make those decisions.
thank you for that, yeah.
Thank you, Sarah. That was great.
Thank you.
So this morning, I have the pleasure of introducing Elizabeth Frank-Thompson and Dr. Joanne Billings. Elizabeth Frank-Thompson is the Pulmonary Clinical Research Manager at Children's Minnesota in Minneapolis. She has been in her current position for approximately 2 years and previously worked as an RC with CF kiddos. She has a master's degree in public health and a bachelor's degree in chemistry and is certified ACRP CP. Dr. Billings is an associate professor of medicine in the Division of Pulmonary, Allergy, Critical Care, and Sleep Medicine at the University of Minnesota. She's an IRB committee chair and lead faculty chair of the University of Minnesota's IRB. She's been an investigator involved in CF research for over 20 years.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. A real emphasis on morning too with these 7:15 meetings. I'm just glad they don't have my face on like a 4-foot screen. So thank you for the invitation to come and present this case from 2 different perspectives. At Children's Minnesota, we were invited by the study sponsor to attend I gotta click these slides. No disclosure, sorry. So at Children's, we were invited to attend an informational study webinar about an upcoming mRNA trial. We were invited as a referral site only, but both referral sites and recruiting sites were on the call, which I think was something that was a little different for both of our sites. As the study sponsor described the trial, I immediately had a patient in mind. I'm sure that many of you have the similar situation when you hear of these new exciting trials. And I was pulling up her chart, I was checking her mutations. So after the initial welcome, we were broken to two different referral sites and study sites, but I did some quick sleuthing through the attendee list and was able to find Mary Bailey, which was a research coordinator at the University of Minnesota that I had worked many times on referrals with. So I was pretty sure that the University of Minnesota was doing the trial. So on paper, our young lady that I had in my mind met all the criteria. She is a 20-year-old woman who's relatively healthy for an adult living with CF with rare mutations. The study sponsor shared the full inclusion-exclusion criteria with us, and she met all of that criteria. Additionally, as an adult, this young lady had previously participated in a demanding phase 2 clinical trial at another center, so we knew that her and her family were willing and interested to participate in more research. So as the title of this presentation alludes to, the inclusion-exclusion criteria didn't tell the whole story of this young woman's life. In reality, she's not only a person living with CF, but also cognitive delays and learning disabilities. She still lives at home with her parents, and as the family says, she probably always will. In addition to living with her parents, she also lives with siblings, all of whom have varying degrees of learning differences. And during the last 2 years, each of her parents had complex health problems. So her parents' medical issues actually led to the patient having to withdraw from that phase 2 trial that she was participating in, since it required air travel to the study site, and neither parent was able to accompany her on these trips anymore. So after the initial study webinar, the study sponsor was contacting me about every month for the referral, and then once the first site opened, it was about every 2 weeks. So over the next several months, I poured over her chart with her primary pulmonologist, our nurse coordinator, and our social worker. I checked and rechecked the inclusion criteria, and checked and rechecked that she was actually her own guardian. Had her parents actually had guardianship over her, their referral probably would have been more cut and dry, since the state of Minnesota has a statute surrounding guardianship and experimental procedures, I think just like that the person had mentioned before. So in her notes, her chart said that the family had thought about guardianship, but they were not pursuing it at this time. So I finally reached out to the study sponsor, described the situation vaguely, and asked about our concerns regarding her learning differences. And I received the response that she was neither included nor excluded based on her cognitive delays. So we mulled over the referral internally for about 9 to 10 months, and we waited for her to be in clinic and to be healthy. I finally approached the patient and her mother, and we watched a recruitment video together, and we talked briefly about the trial and reviewed what we saw in the video together. Both mom and the patient expressed interest in the trial, and I sent her to the UM for the referral. So, Dr. Billings.
Good morning, and thank you. So like Elizabeth said, we were asked to consider the participation of this 20-year-old young woman in a phase 1 clinical trial. And like Elizabeth had said, we knew that there was this history of developmental delay. There was a lot of conversation around the communication with the potential participant should really include the mother, and that we knew about her previous participation in a phase 2 trial, and knew that they had to discontinue participation because of the concerns for her transportation and her need to have her family support for these visits. This was really a tough decision, so I thought that it would be important to talk to the potential participants' primary pulmonologist, Dr. Moore. And we've had a long-standing relationship with Minneapolis Children's. We have done referrals back and forth for many years. We used to meet as a group oftentimes to kind of discuss these referrals and what was going on at each of our centers. And I've known Dr. Moore for a long time. So these were, easy conversations to have when it comes to feeling comfortable with this communication. And so again, we talked about how her mother and her parents in general really involved actually in her clinical care and some of her clinical decision making, which was important to me. We knew about this previous discussions regarding guardianship. And my concerns were, I knew that this was a phase 1 clinical trial, that this was a complex protocol. It was about safety and tolerability. It was not about efficacy or benefit. It was very clear in the consent that there was no benefit to participation. And so was this, an individual that can understand, the consent, the complexity of the protocol, and would they independently be able to share with me concerns as we went through this trial? These were heavy days, dosing days, where I needed to know in real time how they were feeling, what kind of symptoms they were having, and I needed to know, that it was safe. And after this discussion with Dr. Moore, we really felt that we couldn't go forward with offering her this opportunity for screening and enrollment. And so I just wanted to talk about, at the University of Minnesota, we've spent some time thinking about vulnerable adults and those with impaired decision-making capacity. And I'll kind of talk about why we pulled out that specific population. And it really comes back to documents you guys are very familiar with, and that's, for example, the Belmont Report, which does speak to vulnerable populations, where we really have to consider things about the nature and the degree of risk that we're asking participants to undertake. And really thinking about particular populations that are involved, and really, again, about benefit. Is there a benefit to participation when we're thinking about including them in clinical trials? And then getting to OHRP 46 CFR 46.111, which really comes back to the criteria for approval for research. And this, one of the particular criteria is the selection of subjects is equitable. And it pulls out the idea that the IRB should be cognizant of special problems of research that involves a category of subjects who are vulnerable to coercion or undue influence, such as children, prisoners, individuals with impaired decision-making capacity, and then economically or educationally disadvantaged persons. And we all know that there's subparts that are specific to those, pregnant women, fetuses, neonates, prisoners, and children. But there is no subpart that really is developed around adults lacking decision-making capacity or vulnerable adults, and so kind of that broad category. So years ago, the University of Minnesota kind of undertook this idea and said, we need to really provide guidance for our investigators so that we're appropriately kind of thinking about this population, have guidance on how to include them in research. And really it came down to, going back to these documents and developing some guidance to investigators around these specific populations. So our policy is that really comes back to this idea of that it's adults that need the ability to understand the information that's relevant to making an informed and voluntary decision to participate. And this includes the ability to understand the purpose of the research and the procedures involved, the consequences of participation, and again, the idea of risk and having benefit, and the ability to decide and effectively communicate a choice about participation. And they pull out examples such as acute medical conditions, psychiatric disorders, neurologic disorders, development disorders, and behavioral disorders, but this is obviously not a completely inclusive list. So the guidance from our IRB around this population, and this is about greater than minimal risk research, is that there has to be evidence of anticipated benefit to the participant in order to include them in research. And when there's no prospect of direct benefit in there, and again, this whole idea of lacking capacity to consent so that they truly understand the volunteerism, the understanding of the risk, and understanding really having to have benefit for allowing them to participate, we are not allowed to include those people unless there truly is evidence of benefit. And so after the conversation with Dr. Moore, her and I just decided, given all of this, that we wouldn't move forward with screening this participant and enrolling her in this clinical trial. I will say that our guidance goes on. It's pretty comprehensive. It's not just specific to this certain situation. We have guidance about ways to assess capacity to consent for kind of ongoing things that may have to do with studies that do show benefit and how to assess that capacity and whether they should participate. But this is just specific to this situation. So the important points that Elizabeth and I really wanted to point out is that this kind of long-standing relationship of collaboration was, really important. It's allowed us to continue to refer back and forth between our centers, but it really also helped facilitate a conversation that was difficult for both of us. Obviously, as an investigator, it was, we want to recruit and enroll, but we also have to really think about and consider kind of the participant and the potential vulnerabilities. And really, the second point is that we really have to consider this idea of inclusion of adults with impaired decision-making capacity in research and thinking about the risks and the benefits, understanding if they can really appreciate their participation. So, questions for us?
This is a great presentation. Thank you so much. I think as I sat there thinking about it, I was thinking about these phase 1 studies where there really is no anticipated benefit. Mm-hmm. And I think as someone who has written protocols and reviewed a lot of protocols, there's a lot of template language that's, informed consent or by the guardian or whatever. And I don't know whether or not that particular phase 1 protocol said that, but really, in essence, I'm not sure that it would be appropriate even if there had been guardianship, right? Because this person, it's like a child. It's like someone who's a child, right? You never enroll people under 18 who can't consent for themselves in a study where there's not anticipated benefit. And so it just kind of struck me that it probably should have been prohibited on the basis of the inclusion criteria about not being able to sign for themselves. So anyway, I really good. Never really thought about it, but template language just follows itself around. Over and over. So.
Yeah, at our institution, we're not allowed to have LARs for phase 1. I mean, it's just a part of our guidance. Yeah, so we couldn't even consider it. Yeah, very important.
I have a thought, and you explained why you made this decision very clearly, and I understand what you just said, Jill. But from the coordinator perspective, this person did not require a guardianship. She was able to sign for herself. If she really wanted to do this, what do you say to her? I mean, how do you handle that?
I think that really came back to the conversation that, we had with Elizabeth and then with Dr. Moore. And it still came back to my comfort with that and knowing that we were told, talk to her mother about her participation. And I'm not supposed to talk to her mother, I'm supposed to talk to her. So that was my first, red flag, pink flag, however you want to characterize it, saying that I can't do that, I have to go to her. And the whole idea that a lot of her clinical decision-making was made with her parents really just didn't sit comfortably with me. And so, again, I just felt like this wasn't going to benefit her. I needed to appreciate risk. And coming back to the idea as an investigator, if I'm doing a phase 1 dosing when I have no idea what could happen during that dosing, right? Sometimes we just don't know what to anticipate. Would she be able to communicate with me effectively to know that it's going okay, that it's safe? Or would a parent need to be in the room helping her facilitate that conversation? And that just didn't seem appropriate for me. That just felt like that added to the risk and the ability to really, work with her to participate.
Yeah. Did your patient have any objection to the decision?
Not outright. I think Dr. Moore called her mom to explain it to her as her pulmonologist. But just like recently, this week, she reached out with more trials, that are phase 1. And it's the same thing, with a patient with rare mutations right now, a lot of them are phase 1, especially the most exciting ones. So it's difficult to deliver that news over and over to her. Like, you're probably not going to qualify for this one either. But I think this, as you said, there maybe should have been a criteria. I think it falls under that thing that's always in the protocol that says, in the opinion of the investigator, does any, So it's in there, and I think that was part of our hesitancy, referring, like, should we make this referral? Should we not make this referral? Like, it's their decision. Is it our decision to refer or not to refer? So I think we went back and forth a lot, and I had talked to Mary and Brooke at the University of Minnesota, like, how should I approach her? And we talked about having this warm handoff. We didn't want to do it over the phone. I kind of wanted to gauge how she looked, what questions they asked when we talked about the trial. So I think it is that little, like, vague area that's like, in the opinion of the investigator, what else could there be, so.
I agree. And this was a lot. I mean, I thought it was a very good referral, and it took a lot of conversation. It wasn't an easy, this is a no.
Yeah.
Just a question for you. You said the subject participated in a previous clinical trial. Should that subject have been legally consented for that trial?
It was phase 2, and I don't know if there was an LAR or.
I'm still guessing it was greater than minimal risk.
So in that.
But the question is.
Okay.
Can you talk into
Sure.
the microphone?
Okay.
But the question is, do you think that subject was able to legally consent?
So in that situation, our guidance from the University of Minnesota is we have instruments that we use and for minimal risk, and then not greater than minimal risk, and then greater than minimal risk to assess capacity consent. In the case of not greater than minimal risk, we do the UBAC, which is a little bit of a teach back after consent. And then for those studies that are greater than minimal risk, we have to do the MacArthur. And so all our research coordinators are trained in the use of the MacArthur so that they can assess the capacity to consent of the individual. And this isn't the case if there isn't an LAR. So it would have been something that if we had that phase 2 trial and she was a potential participant, we would have just pursued using those instruments. Now, I know that probably varies at different institutions. And again, we've kind of built out around this population because the guidance, that we don't have a subpart, so we kind of developed around that. And so that's what we do at our institution, and I'm just not sure about where she was at and how that capacity was assessed.
I'm Dr. Moore, so I'll speak to that if that. So at the time that she participated in that phase 2 clinical trial, she was actually under the age of 18. And so her parents would have consented and she assented to the trial. And so it would have been legal at that point. So,
Did she turn 18 during the trial, though?
I think because it had started, she's 20 now.
Mm-hmm.
And so I wasn't her pulmonologist at that time,
right.
but I believe she was 16 or maybe 17 when the trial started.
Okay. I thought she turned 18 during the trial, but
yeah. I would have to look back.
right,
Sorry.
right.
Thank you. Great job, ladies.
Thanks, Brooke.
I agree. Great job. This is a tough case, so appreciate you sharing with us. Okay, next I have the pleasure of introducing Adrienne, my co-moderator. Adrienne DeRico is from the Children's Hospital of Pittsburgh, where she's been a research coordinator in both their pediatric and adult CF programs for just over 15 years. Adrienne completed the LOFT RC program and then moved into the role of mentor in the RC mentoring program for the past few years. She has served on the NACFC RC Planning Committee for the past several years and is beginning her role as RC representative, taking my place, for the NACFC Program Planning Committee at the conclusion of this conference.
Okay, so this is AEs of special interest. And for my disclosure, I am a recipient of the Lark Award. So what's the story? When we were leaving the TDN conference in April, my coworkers and I were seated separately on the plane, and just before takeoff, before the pilot says, "Okay, put all your devices in airplane mode," we received an unexpected communication from a subject mother, and we had a subject in a drug study who was traveling by car from mom's house to dad's house out of state. And halfway through the drive, her sister noticed her having a seizure in the back seat. Mom immediately pulled over and called an ambulance, and she was taken to a local ER outside of our hospital system. After being taken care of at the ER, to our surprise, she was not admitted to the hospital, thus resulting in an AE, not an SAE. So, just refresh, AE is any untoward medical occurrence in a subject during the study, and an SAE, any untoward medical occurrence that results in death, is life-threatening, results in hospitalization, disability, congenital anomaly, or birth defect, or requires intervention to prevent one of those outcomes. So an AE of special interest is an AE that the sponsor takes special interest in and requests further follow-up, however, it doesn't qualify as an SAE. These exist to protect research subjects and need to be followed carefully, as side effects can occur and surprise us or just be one-offs. This protocol did not have AEs of special interest specifically listed, however, it was treated like one. AEs of special interest take a different amount of time and need to be treated differently financially. So what's the problem here? AEs require a little bit of follow-up. SAEs involve constant follow-up, and they have their own documentation process. This AE of special interest was treated more like an SAE by the sponsor, leaving a heavy burden on the RCs and PI without time to prepare or complete necessary paperwork or even compensation. Now, we're talking about 16 plus hours of follow-up that was required with study monitors, medical monitors, multiple phone calls, video chats, emails, contacting outside hospitals requesting medical records, waiting on those, and then redacting and sending them back to the sponsor. So normally at our institution, we bill per SAE form. So if there's an initial report and then 2 follow-ups, we're sending 3 bills. As a direct result of this, we changed our budget to increase overhead costs for all studies. This actually became an institutional change, not just NCF, to compensate for the time spent dealing with the AEs of special interest. So, in conclusion, it's important to look for opportunities when developing our budgets so that we're appropriately compensated for the work that we do. Any questions?
Thank you, Adrian. I think we've probably all experienced something like this at some time or another. Would love to hear any other experiences if you have any, or any questions.
Hi, Adrian.
Hey.
Was this considered an AE of special interest because of the going to the ER, or was it because the PI indicated that this drug or this AE was potentially related to study drug?
So at the time, we weren't sure if it was related to study drug or not, so I'm sure that did red flag some things. But yeah, I think that's really why they did it.
And is there, this probably is for the sponsor, not you, but why didn't they call it an SAE?
So ultimately, I think it came down to the PI decision, and because she wasn't admitted, I think that's where we ultimately went with that. But I do think that the sponsor probably did also have interest because it was seizure activity in a drug study.
And have you had any situations like this since then? Are they giving you any trouble with your change in protocol and billing those hours?
No, once we went to them with the budget change, they did accept it. They did agree that this was a lot of work, and we do happen to see these AEs of special interest a lot more now with these earlier phase trials, so they did agree.
So key takeaway, just ask.
Right. Great job, Adrian. So I'm wondering, I have two questions. Did you put in a line item for AEs of special interest? And we've also been burned by something like this, particularly requesting medical records outside of our hospital system. And we started to put a line item in for medical record requests.
Okay.
And then we had to specify that outside of, children's, which is a standalone hospital, so it's not hard to do that. So those are just my two things.
So we tried to line item this in the budget for AEs of special interest, and they would not accept it. But they ultimately suggested that we add it to the overhead. So we still got away eventually. It just wasn't exactly in the way that we wanted. And to my knowledge, we do not have outside medical records in the budget, but that's great. I'm going to take that home. Thank you so much.
Okay, any other questions? I do want to go back. There was a question that we didn't see until after we started our case presentations. And someone asked, is ACRP certification recommended over SOCRA? Is it recommended to pursue ACRP certification if we are part of SOCRA already? Okay. And that leads us to Patty, our next speaker. So we'll get out of here. Oh, you want to? Yeah, come on up and we'll get out of your way.
Before you take off, Candy has been our RC representative for the NACFC Program Planning Committee 15 years. How long have you done it? It's been 3. When you take on this job, it feels so much longer. And I just want to, first of all, thank Adrian, who's been mentored this last year by Candy. And thank you, Adrian, for being willing to take this on. But I also wanted us all to have the opportunity to thank Candy. This is a huge job that she's done. She's done a superb job.
If I can just say, this is not me. It's all the volunteers that came forward and are helping with this, because all I had to do was sit back and guide. So it's not me. Thank everybody who volunteered and you've seen up here speaking and moderating.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. So regarding ACRP, when I started at the foundation, I thought, wouldn't it be nice to provide an opportunity for sitting for a certification exam, professional certification exam? And I called SOCRA and I called ACRP. ACRP answered their phone, SOCRA did not. And I did, there were many emails, there was more than just one call. And just ACRP was so easy to work with and responsive, and that was how the decision was made. They're both, in my mind, equally excellent certifications, and either one is spectacular if you hold them. But we decided we wanted to partner only with one, and we went with ACRP. Just that was the decision, but both are superb. So thank you. Great question. So we're in the home stretch for this morning, and I just look out on a room full of friends. And I want to tell you a story for the rest of this session. So just get comfortable. Think of this as kindergarten and it's story hour. I am now trying to advance. Oh, do you do it with the mouse? The click? Okay, yeah. So I have no disclosures to make regarding this presentation. I have 3 children, Daniel, Jonathan, and Rebecca. Daniel's dressed as a rain cloud here in this picture. He played this role in his kindergarten play and did such a stupendous job that his little brother Jonathan jumped up on the stage and gave him this lovely brotherly hug. Daniel used to work on the cure to cystic fibrosis in our kitchen Saturday mornings. He would mix together combinations of ingredients he found in the refrigerator and cupboards. And then he would tell Jonathan, you have to eat it. It might be the cure. And Saturday after Saturday, Daniel worked to make these combinations. And Saturday after Saturday, Jonathan took them. Because you know what? As far as he knew, it might be the cure. This was in the mid-1980s. And this was before Toby before Pulmozyme, and before Hope. John was born in 1981. He was diagnosed with cystic fibrosis at 8 years of age due to failure to thrive. He received care throughout his life from 4 different CF centers, a military facility, and eventually a transplant center where he underwent a double lung transplant in April of 1993. But despite everyone's best efforts and his own indomitable spirit, he passed away September 29th, 1993, at 11 years of age. We, like so many parents who lose their children so young, we're shattered. A lot has changed since then. So today I'm going to tell you a story. It's not about a child or even about a family, but about a disease. We will review the history and some sentinel moments, and like any good story, there'll be instances of bravery, but also of desperation, of partnership and collaboration, and of radical independence, where some take it alone and go less traveled paths. But the heartbeat of every page of this story is filled with what I saw in Daniel many years ago, a deeply held desire to do all that we can to improve the lives of those living with cystic fibrosis. We start our story with Dr. Dorothy Anderson in 1938. She was an American pathologist working in New York, and she published the first article describing cystic fibrosis of the pancreas, is what it was called back then. It was published in the American Journal of Diseases of Children. It provided this first description of CF. These children were often thought to have celiac disease, and so she was able to tease apart celiac disease from cystic fibrosis and describe this entirely new entity. Her findings, her results were after doing autopsies on 49 infants and children. If you look at this little graph, it's too hard to see from where you are. I'll just tell you the great majority of these children died from dehydration before they hit 6 months of age. So Dr. Anderson started studying more and more about cystic fibrosis. She developed a way of diagnosing this disease. It was through collecting duodenal secretions from the intestine, evaluating them from pancreatic enzyme content, and could diagnose cystic fibrosis. It was invasive. It was unpleasant, but it worked. And it only got the more severe phenotypes, but again, it was better than thinking everyone had celiac disease, wasn't it? She became these children's clinician, a world-renowned expert in cystic fibrosis, and is considered the matriarch of cystic fibrosis. There. Dr. Paul de Santagnes joined Dr. Anderson as they started treating CF patients with penicillin. This was brand new to treat their pulmonary infections in a New York City emergency room during a heat wave in the summer of 1948. Dr. Paul de Santagnes noted several of their CF patients showing up in the ER with dehydration and heat stroke. He also noted how their little hands on those glasses of water left a residue. As he looked into that, he realized people with CF have a higher concentration of sodium chloride and potassium in their sweat. And with that knowledge, developed the first iteration of the sweat test. The sweat test has improved through the years, but finally we had a good way of diagnosing CF, not just the severe phenotype. And to this day, this is the standard of care for diagnosing. This is the gold standard for diagnosing cystic fibrosis. This little child was 2 years and 5 months of age at the time of this photo. And this is how cystic fibrosis looked. This was the typical way CF looked in the 1950s. These children rarely made it to kindergarten. Dr. Milton and Evelyn Grob lived in Philadelphia. Milton was a pediatrician, and their 2 oldest children had cystic fibrosis. They were cared for by Dr. Anderson in her clinic, and this was the early 1950s, and they were told to love on these children, keep them happy and comfortable, and try to enjoy the very short life they would likely have. The Grobs wanted more for their children. That line always gets me. Thank God. They started building building a network of other families whose children had similar fates due to cystic fibrosis. Winnie, or what she was often called Dee Sharples, was a pediatrician and a mother of 2 children with cystic fibrosis. She was part of a wealthy family, was well-connected, a bit of a socialite, and so she was instrumental in bringing attention and funding to the cause. So here we have a little timeline, the formative years. Led by the Grobs and others, in 1952, small groups of parents started to meet in Philadelphia. They held their first fundraiser event in 1954, where Dee Sharples was their guest speaker, and they raised $14,000. In 1955, the CF Foundation was formed, and they held their first scientific meeting. In 1961, they had 2 multidisciplinary care centers established for cystic fibrosis, and shortly after, just a few years later, the patient registry had been started. In the 50s, 60s, and 70s, we could diagnose cystic fibrosis, again with that sweat test. We could track the progression of the disease through pulmonary functions testing, and we treated the disease with airway clearance, pancreatic enzyme replacement therapy, monitored sputum, and then treated infections with antibiotics. So for the 50s, 60s, and 70s, this is what we had. Paul Quinton, professor emeritus in the pediatric pulmonary medicine department at UCSD, describes this time. We were looking for the basic defect, something that would unify the many symptoms of this disease. Followed numerous paths, often completely unrelated to any known pathology. It was the Wild West era of research. I should note that Dr. Paul Quinton is both a CF researcher and a patient. Families were desperate. There was not enough progress. The 1980s ushered in significant changes at the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, changes around leadership, changes around how money would be handled, and changes around their own structure. These were vast changes, but it helped us become laser focused, but they were not easy. We'll start with leadership. Dr. Robert Bell, was a researcher at the NIH working in endocrinology. And one wintry, overcast day there in Bethesda in 1976, a colleague asked Bob if he would attend a scientific meeting in San Diego regarding cystic fibrosis. Now, he was unfamiliar with CF, and he decided, though, to go. Have to just stop a minute. On a wintry, overcast day in Bethesda, which is where I live, it's easy to decide to go to a meeting in San Diego. Anyway, for some reason, I don't know why, he did decide to go. And in a small hotel, the meeting was catered by potluck, by families. This was a small grassroots operation. Bell was unexpectedly moved by these desperate parents. This community had no resources, no science, and no hope. Bob became the CF Foundation's Director of Science and Medicine 4 years later, eventually becoming the president and CEO in 1994, where he stayed until he retired in 2015. When Bob first joined the CF Foundation, he knew he wanted to develop a network of research sites focusing solely on cystic fibrosis. It was similar to what he'd done at the NIH around I can't even see my own notes. This is why one should bring their glasses up here. It was similar to what he had done at the NIH with diabetes, and was estimated that this would cost about $15 million. And these were resources the foundation did not have at that time. In 1982, Robert Dressing took over the helm of the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. Dressing felt that the foundation was full of confusion and waste. There were 70 chapters, and as Bajel Travid says in Breath from Salt, the 70 chapters, it was like a dysfunctional armada. They all led with the same mission, but the ships each sailed independent of the others, led by a group of volunteers. There was a lot of jumbling around, and worst of all, the funds that were being raised were not being sent to the headquarters, not being sent to the foundation. And this was not okay. And so Bob Dressing felt that he would do what he could to change this. And because he was in a position to do it, it did change, believe me. He first wrote up a new chapter, a new guidelines for how the chapters would function. And if you wanted to remain a chapter, you would agree to these new guidelines, or you could not be a CF Foundation chapter. Those new guidelines required a couple of things. One of them was, you could go ahead and close your bank account. We will open one for you. And then once a week, every week, funds were taken from your account and put into the foundation's national coffers. This wasn't popular. There was also a number of other changes involved, but I'm just going to talk about this. I'm going to talk about the money. Money matters in a lot of organizations, but in a nonprofit, it's huge. In a disease-based nonprofit, it's huge. In 1980s, early 80s, my son was receiving care at Little Rock Children's Hospital, and we were deeply involved with the chapter there. And I remember we did the midnight bike ride, which was my kid's favorite fundraiser because what kid doesn't want to ride a bike at midnight? You know, that's just fun. And we did Bowl for Breath and all kinds of other fundraisers. But about 1983, we had a patient panel discussion in a room a lot like this. And parents stood up here, and we had this discussion about funds and the CF Foundation's decision to bring them centrally, to pool the money together. So this was just very controversial. It's probably hard to sit in this room and realize how controversial this was. There were families in the room that said these funds were raised by local families. The funds were from local donors. We have important local projects, and so it should stay local. There were families whose children were desperately ill, and they didn't have the funds to pay for the kind of care they needed. And care back then was enzymes and hospitalizations. It wasn't a whole lot more than that. But they couldn't afford it, and they needed the money, and they didn't understand why these fundraising dollars couldn't help them. And worse, there were families whose kids were not only ill, but they knew they were dying. How on earth would they pay for a funeral when they couldn't even pay for the medical bills they'd already accrued? These were hard conversations, but I was part of a different group. We also had all the same issues, but in the back of my mind, I thought, nothing will ever change if we don't pool our resources together and buy us some science. If we start paying for enzymes and funeral expenses, we would be sitting here today still paying for enzymes and funeral expenses. We would not have moved the needle. Well, this is controversial, and you read Breath from Salt, you'll read some very colorful meetings. There were actually, I won't go into it, but really colorful. It makes you want to read the book, doesn't it? Eventually, the decision was made and folks had to get behind it. And I have to say, in my opinion, this is where the foundation found its laser focus. With the aid of the former CFF Chief Operating Officer, Richard Mattingly, the foundation under Dr. Bell successfully raised more dollars per patient than any other disease-focused organization in history. And then came 1989. In 1989, a team of scientists supported by the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation discovered the cystic fibrosis gene and opened the door to our understanding of the disease at its most basic level. People with CF and their loved ones were hopeful. We hoped. I remember I hoped. My son was 8 years old at this time. We hoped that this discovery would quickly lead to new drugs to fight this disease and that would no longer be killing our young children. But the gene discovery alone wasn't enough to spur innovation. The challenge of taking scientific knowledge from the laboratory and applying it to develop effective treatments for CF was a larger obstacle than anyone had anticipated. Two things happened at about the same time in the 1990s. The development of the TDN and the idea of venture philanthropy. We'll start with venture philanthropy. People with CF and their loved ones, again, were desperate for faster progress. With a growing sense of impatience, Dr. Bob Bell landed on an idea called venture philanthropy to break through the pharmaceutical industry's reluctance to get involved in cystic fibrosis research. Venture philanthropy, where a nonprofit organization provides funding for a for-profit company to de-risk an investment, was an entirely new approach to funding research. This was a monumental shift. This was a monumental shift. It's not what the other nonprofits, it's not what the other cool kids on the block were doing. And it came with risk, and no one was sure it would really work. But the CF Foundation's Board of Trustees agreed with Dr. Bell, and he started making phone calls, trying to find a partner, a willing partner in this work. Eventually, 2 drug companies returned his calls, and in 2000, the foundation made its first large investment, $40 million, with Aurora Biosciences, now Vertex Pharmaceuticals, to discover compounds that might correct the core defect in people with cystic fibrosis. He also knew we not only needed a way to encourage drug development, but we also needed a way to get a compound through the clinical trial process. In 1997, he asked Dr. Bonnie Ramsey, a pediatric pulmonologist at Seattle Children's, to take a 9-month sabbatical to formulate a plan for developing the CF Clinical Research Network. This was an important moment in our story. We had had some failure when it came to clinical research. But in 1993 and then again in 98, we experienced some success with 2 successful drug development programs, Pulmozyme and Toby, both receiving FDA approval and were available to our CF patient population, all due to the tireless efforts of CF care centers, staff, research coordinators, industry partners, investigators, and the incredible patients who participated in these trials. The Cystic Fibrosis Therapeutics Development Network, or TDN, was established in 1998 to facilitate development and conduct of all phases of clinical trials and to identify appropriate outcomes for future studies. The TDN is the largest CF clinical trial network in the world. The early days of the TDN was a time for pivoting. Investigators needed to learn team science, how to row together. Rather than each investigator doing their own projects, people had to collaborate and come up with the best projects and work together on those. The TDN Coordinating Center took on the approach of servant leadership as they developed their faculty and provided them opportunities for leadership. The TDN matured and they're developed more of a site focus. Collaboration was both celebrated and expected. A healthy competition was fostered through providing metrics, tracking study startup, site activation, and all sorts of things, which you are all quite familiar with. Information provided to the sites through these metrics provided them opportunities for identifying and participating in quality improvement work. The central role of the research coordinator became obvious, and well-supported RCs were part of the network's success. So here we are, RCs. Y'all are remarkable. Dr. J.P. Clancy at the foundation says you are the secret sauce that makes this whole thing work. In 2022, we conducted an RC survey asking about, I really can't see, about if you feel that you belong at your CF center. Oh, goodness, thank you. If you feel you belong at your CF center, if you feel you're making a difference in your work, and if your job is a good match to your skills. And 93 to 94% agreed with those statements in that survey, a survey of 220 RCs. And I say all that to say, you're not only good at what you do, but you seem to like it. You know that you're making a difference. So we're celebrating 25 years of the TDN. We've grown from the original 7 sites to 91. We've evaluated 81 unique study agents, resulting in 15 FDA-approved therapies, and obtained 288,000 samples for the biorepository, and developed 15 CF-specific outcome measures. Wow. The first 10 years of the TDN, the focus really was on symptomatic therapies. We were looking at inhaled antibiotics, mucolytics, mucus hydrators, pancreatic enzymes, and anti-inflammatories. The second 10 years, the focus was on modulator therapies. And now we have pivoted, and we are focusing on genetic-based therapies. Let's look at this a little differently. In the US, before 2012, all therapies were directed at signs and symptoms of cystic fibrosis. Then in 2012, highly effective modulator therapy became available for 4% of the US population. For that 4%, you will remember, it was life-changing. For everyone else, it showed proof of concept. And for every RC, I think our hearts beat faster with kind of this, oh my gosh, we really can do this. I saw Candy look up here. She remembers. And in a span of 8 years, we moved from highly effective modulators for a small percentage of the population to highly effective modulator therapy for the majority of the US population over the age of 2 years. This graph shows the median predicted survival age in 5-year increments from 1990 to 2021. You'll notice it starts in the 20s, and it's now 56.6 years. Quoting Bruce Marshall, when I see this graph, I think about the contributions of so many people over several decades that made this happen, starting with the parents, who would not accept the hopeless prognosis of their children with CF and instead started the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation in the 1950s. I think about the countless hours of airway clearance, inhaled therapies, and other treatments in the homes of people with CF and their families, and I think about the donors and volunteers, the multidisciplinary care teams, the researchers, the basic scientists, colleagues in pharma, and many others. And I must add, I think about the people in this room. The story underlying this simple line graph is what some have called the greatest story in medicine. And I just know it's our story. This article was published in the Journal of Cystic Fibrosis a few months ago. Elexacaftor, tezacaftor, and ivacaftor projected survival, long-term health outcomes in people with cystic fibrosis homozygous for F508del. Projected survival for people with cystic fibrosis treated with ETI was 71.6 years. Projected survival was 82.5 years when ETI was initiated between the ages of 12 and 17. And in the conclusion, the author stated, our model suggests ETI treatment may substantially increase survival for people with CF, with early initiation potentially allowing people with CF to achieve near normal life expectancy. And if you've been looking for a place to clap, this is it, kids. A young man who I am privileged to call friend had this post on Facebook, and I share it with you with his permission. He started Trikafta December of 2019. As I sit here and reflect on another birthday, another year past my doctor's predictions of my life expectancy, and feeling in the best shape of my life at that, another year with no CF exacerbations, another year with no hospitalizations, another year. I decided to finally get myself a very special present, a tribute to remind myself of all the difficult years growing up, the friends with CF I've lost over the years, and all that led to where we are in recognition of treatment of CF and all that we have today. This tattoo I will wear and will be a reminder of the tough days of the past, and also a subtle reminder towards all the future to just breathe. Life is tough, but I will always be able to look at my arm and know, just breathe, just breathe. And in a beautiful scroll down his forearm are the words, just breathe. And we're not done. There are those who, because of their mutations, will not benefit from modulator therapy. That brings us to the CF Foundation's Path to a Cure, supporting development of more modulators, expanding access of modulators to more patients, and restoring CFTR protein when none exists, and fixing or replacing the CFTR gene through gene therapy. We dream of a day when every person with cystic fibrosis can live without limitations caused by their disease. And until this is a reality, we will relentlessly pursue new treatments and ultimately a cure for cystic fibrosis until it's done for everyone. Today we honor where we have been and where we currently are. We also look to the future. I encourage you to be nimble, adaptable, laser focused, work on things that matter, pivot when you need to, always with the mission driving your efforts. And I encourage you to dare to dream. In our kitchen, a very long time ago, my Daniel believed things could be better, and I encourage you to believe the same. This story, one more slide. Thank you. This story is still being written. It's not done yet. And this next chapter will be written by the people sitting in this room. And I believe there are people in this room that will work on the cure. And the funny thing about big advances in medicine, when you're first doing it, you don't even know it. Do everything like it matters and write this next chapter well. Thank you. Thank you. That concludes RC updates and special topics. Have a great day. I look forward to seeing you at the RC reception this evening from 6 to 8 p.m., where we will award the Judy Williams Award. Thank you.